When you take a company from $3.5 million to $500 million, and by the time I left, it was close to $8 million, because I did a 2-year earnout at Adobe, close to $800 million. I think now it's $3 billion, by the way.
In rev.
I mean, that's how big that business is that we built. When you do that, you end up in an environment where you get to kind of almost do whatever you want.
Chris Harrington, it's great to see you.
It's good to see you, man.
Great to be with you, and really excited to dig in here. I want to ask you about your favorite chapter of your career. You've done a lot.
Yeah.
You're somebody who I respect a lot, and I think the audience will understand why as we go through this.
Thank you.
Tell me about your favorite chapter of your entire career.
Favorite chapter? I think it would be the Omniture days. Honestly, just before I knew you. I joined Omniture in 2002. At the time, they were 6 years old. I was net employee 38. They had just laid off 200 employees.
Oh, wow.
The day I joined, we secured $1 million investment from a local investor here named Nobu. You should talk to Nobu, actually. He'd be amazing.
Awesome.
And that $1 million was to make payroll and just, to keep the business floating. I was president of field, so basically everything customer facing. And the competition, the energy, the passion. When I joined, I was in a 40-way tie for 4th place. Like if I got invited to an RFP, it was a lottery draw,
Yeah.
And so going from there and taking the business from $3.5 million up through $500 million and selling it, parting ways with the business and spending a couple years at Adobe following that with a $1.8 billion acquisition. That is the period of my professional life in terms of a chapter that I'm actually most proud of.
How long was that, start to finish?
2002 through 2009. So I joined in 2002. We went public in 2005. We had acquired 7 companies, 2 European, because, why not? 5 domestic. And then in 2009, we sold the business to Adobe for $1.8 billion.
And largest acquisition in Utah history at the time?
At the time, yeah, by a mile, yeah.
I mean, and that's really what set Utah up for what it is today, hands down. This is what Novell, where you've got these other guys, but really, I think the innovation started happening when that building at the point of the mountain got built, right?
And what's funny about it is, that building was, no one really talks about. That building was designed by Josh James. I mean, that was, that's what he wanted to build. Really? That's what he wanted to do.
Wow.
But, when you're a entrepreneur and you're calling all the shots and all of a sudden you're sitting in a boardroom waiting for, Shantanu to say something, that wasn't going to work. So I knew Josh was a short timer, but yeah, I mean, I believe that's the time when the SaaS model, that whole mindset, the go-to-market model that Utah's really known for, that's when it took off.
People realize what's possible.
Yeah.
Now, so you were there 7 years. You had a couple of different roles, but at some point you became the CRO or the VP of sales or the president or something, right?
President of field. That was my role the whole time.
The whole time.
Yeah. So basically everything customer facing, with the exception of marketing. I had demand gen on the marketing side, but Josh is a pretty powerful branding guy, so he owned branding and all of that. But everything customer facing rolled up through me. Ended up with teams all over Europe, all over Asia Pacific. From Hong Kong all the way through Sydney. I mean, it was an amazing run.
Why was that the most? I mean, the growth obviously is fun. Anytime your company's growing, it's fun.
Sure.
But what was it about Omniture that was so fun to you? Was it the people you were working with? Was it the experiences that you got, sort of building teams around the world? Was it the challenge of beating the competitor? What was it exactly that was so interesting or fun to you?
Yeah, it's a combination of things, Tyler. If I'm thinking, to be fair, one of the things that's really powerful about their business model is that it created the first kind of commercial accountability for marketing. I mean, you think about it, marketers were out there spending money creating whatever they needed to with no accountability, right? And your estimation of ROI was like, yeah, it looks good. This was driving down to the core. Was this successful? Is this a good use of your resources? Is this a good experience for your users? That was really compelling. So your value proposition was incredibly powerful. So that was part of it. Because obviously when you walk in, you're going to want a solid value prop when you're moving in. So that was the baseline. And then it came down to the competition. I mean, Tyler, we did some stuff that you couldn't get away with today, to be honest with you. When I say we were in a 40-way tie for fourth place, I mean, the distance between us and number 3 was a mile. Right? We walked in and the top company was Web Trends, then Website Story, then a company called Core Metrics, and then everybody else. And we just said, look, we're going to take the gloves off and we are going to make it fun. I went in, I started to recruit every account executive that ever beat us. I was in their ear constantly. I would, hey, I'm in your city. Let's have drinks. Hey, I'm in your city. Let's have,
Amazing.
Let's do whatever we can.
Yeah.
Every time I beat them, I would hand sign a copy of Selling for Dummies, and I'd ship it to them, right? And if they wouldn't join me, I'd start sweeping their leg. I'd take out their top SC. I'd take out their top BDR. I would do whatever I could to create momentum.
I love that. That's
really powerful. And then one other funny story on the competition side. I remember Core Metrics one day. We had kind of become number 3. And they created an ad that said, was a picture of a gorilla and said, just because they're the 800-pound gorilla doesn't mean you have to eat what they say, something like that. So we said, you know what, let's own this. So we went to all 3 of their offices the next couple of days. We dressed as gorillas. We handed out bananas, banana chips, frozen bananas. And we said, if you want to work for the 800-pound gorilla, let us know. We started taking applications, right? Now, one could argue you may not do that today, right?
Yeah.
But that was fun. And what it created this bond with your customers, the bond with you created a community that really, that's what people are starting. You go to Dreamforce, you go to Adobe Summit, they're creating that community now. Yeah. That was the first time we'd really started to see that. So I don't know, I loved it.
Was there many other companies in the world doing what you guys were doing from a creative go-to-market standpoint like that?
I had heard of individual companies with individual leaders and salespeople doing some of that stuff where they would go pretty aggressively at someone. And to be fair, I had people recruiting me, and they were using some of these really creative things so some of it I can't really take ownership of because I'm sitting on, that's dope. That's dope. I remember I was recruiting somebody and I said, hey man, if I can get you to sign this thing, I'll send you 3 chalupas right now. And I was being partly a smartass, and he goes, done. And so there was no DoorDash, no nothing back then. I found a courier in San Francisco because we were here in Utah, and I had a courier go grab 3 chalupas. He goes, are you serious? It's going to cost you $400. I go, done. Do it. So and the reason I had done that is because someone actually, when I was in Europe, saw me in Europe and actually sent me something and said, hey man, you're not returning my calls. Let's talk.
Yeah.
Right. Send it to my hotel. And he had just seen it on my social media. Right. So I don't know. It was an incredible time, bro. It was so fun.
Yeah. I hear that. I mean, look, you and I obviously met at Domo. We'll talk a little bit about that, and a lot of the guys from Domo that we were friends with were Omniture guys. Yeah. And it felt like, Domo, obviously they did a lot of really cool shit too, but Omniture, it feels like, was the OG, and everybody was always talking about stories from Omniture. So it's man, I wish I was a few years older so I could have caught part of that wave and seen what you guys did. Is there a specific salesperson that in all of your career of leading salespeople, is there one that stands out above the rest of them?
Yeah, there would be. I think. And there's so many.
I know.
There's so many great people.
Can you pick one?
Yeah, I'm probably going to pick Wolfgang Mossberg, right?
What a name, first of all.
So Wolfgang was head of sales at Website Story. That was actually our seventh and last acquisition, was acquiring what was number 2 when I joined the company. We acquired them finally at Omniture. So Wolfgang was incredible. And one of the things that I really loved about Wolfgang is that he was one of the few salespeople that didn't just bitch about the product roadmap. He got in there,
sold through it,
and he was involved. Like, he literally said, "Look, I'm going to product meetings.
Oh wow!
I am going to bring you real live customer feedback." And it wasn't. There's a lot of salespeople that'll say, "I need this right now," for a customer, right? Wolfgang would come in with momentum around what he needed and what he needed to see. Incredibly powerful in the room. So I'd pick him, and then the last one would be Stephen Frieder. He's currently the CRO at Adobe. So I had the pleasure of working for Stephen, having Stephen work for me at 2 other companies. And so when I brought him to Omniture, Stephen has a self-deprecating kind of point of view that allows him to come under the radar in a way that is so powerful. Like, when we first started working together, he would deliberately leave his pen in the car, and he would tell the customer, "I don't have a pen." And his whole mindset is, that customer now has done something for me, and it starts the process. And I would watch him work. And it wasn't, Wolfgang's a dynamic charisma. Stephen's just like, "Well, tell me more about that." And he's a little fidgety, very, very curious. And you and I've talked about this before. You've heard me talk about it from stages at kickoff. We don't make money from what we say. We make it from what we hear. And Stephen's curiosity and passion and that kind of unassuming persona allowed him to get so much information out of people. So those are the 2 that I'd highlight.
That's gold.
I know you said one. But
no, I think the 2. I mean, it's great because these are 2 totally different people, and
yeah.
I love the point about Wolfgang, what you said with the fact that he would dig in on product, right? And he'd go. I mean, he also probably was a great listener because he would collect that data, and then he'd go back and he'd have a convincing story to tell product, and then they would prioritize it right in the product roadmap.
Yeah.
Salespeople don't do this today. It doesn't feel like this is happening at all. Why?
To be fair, I think part of it is the ecosystem and the community they live in. You've got to have a company that's willing to let you come into these meetings, right? Because I could have Heisman Wolfgang and said, "Bro,
calm down. Yeah.
Look, I got this. Read what I give you and do what I tell you."
Right.
And so part of it, I think, is that, right? Sometimes, and with a product-minded organization, you have a vision that you're usually trying to execute to. And sometimes outside feedback is not great. And I agree with that. To be fair, I agree with that fundamentally. But sometimes if it's family feedback, meaning, it's part of what's happening with my team, and it's part of what's happening with the customer base that's going to feed us, and having their relevant feedback is really, really powerful. So I think part of it is just, I'm not sure founders and executives today are really wired that way. One of the things that you saw it at Domopalooza, we did it every year at Summit. You see it at Omniture. The very end of those events is always a product feedback, that whole feedback process where the engineering and product team gets up and they roll out the product initiatives and they start taking votes in real time on what's important. That's a really thriving mindset. And sometimes, there were times where someone would ask for something, we're going, "Yeah, we're not doing that. Like, we're not going to build that because something else that we see longer term is going to take priority." So I think part of it is the company, the mindset. I don't think they understand how powerful it can be. And to be fair, a lot of salespeople, they walk in, they're thinking with a very short-term mindset. They're chasing APO as opposed to next year's number. And so part of it is that they're all, I think they're walking in with a little bit of a limited feedback. So.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I want to talk about how we met. So I was a young college kid.
Yeah.
My older brother, I think a lot of the audience knows my story. I'll share it with you quickly, as we're catching up. When I was in college, I was going to school in Salt Lake City, and I paid for college by flipping cars. I was buying and selling cars.
That's right.
And eventually I learned a lot about the automotive space, and I learned that I wanted to build a company around it. And my older brother, is 5 years older, best friend, super close to him, said, don't go build this now. Go join an early stage software company. And there was only a few at the time. It was 2011, 2012, right? And he was friends with Josh. And so he said, go meet my friend Josh. He just sold a company for $2 billion nearly. And I'm like, whoa, like I can't even understand what that means.
It's a lot of zeros.
How many is that? So anyways, I went and I got connected to Josh. He put me in touch with Mark Stock. And I sat down with Mark, and Mark hired me on the spot. And I'm like, what do you want me to do? Like, I didn't know it. I was fresh off the mission. You know, I'd been home like 7 or 8 months, and I was working at KSL.com, and I was flipping cars and going to school. And I was, by the way, newly married. So 5 months after I got home, I'm young, you know, I've got mouths to feed now. It's crazy. And, so anyways, Mark hires me on the spot. I show up there, and there's like, you know, it's in the second building, but like, nothing was, it was very, very startup-y, very new.
For sure.
You remember the phases that we went through.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting down with this guy named Mickey McAllister. Do you remember him?
Yeah.
Mickey?
Yeah.
Mickey was like killer ADM, right? And I just shadowed the guy for a couple of weeks. Anyways, was an ADM at Domo. And I remember the first time I met you, you walked into a sales meeting. Like really met you. You walked into a sales meeting. There was probably like total salespeople, like 15 people at the time.
Yeah.
Right. There was maybe like 7 or 8 AEs and 7 or 8 ADMs. And I remember you said like you kicked the meeting off with like the most random thing ever. And I'm curious if this is something you used a lot.
Yeah.
It was about a shower. You're like, how many of you guys take showers every day? Like everyone's like, me, you know, everybody.
Yeah.
And you're like, how many of you wash your feet? And nobody raised their hand. And you're like, how many of you just let the water like drip off your body onto your feet and you consider your feet washed?
Yeah.
I don't know why you said it, but like, it's something I vividly remember. And I was just like, this guy's super interesting. Like, what is he talking about? And then I think you tied it into something, some kind of sales thing. But yeah, I was always really drawn to you. And I remember, you know, I remember your Red Bull machine was always, you know, the talk of the office. Yeah. Like, how many of these Red Bulls can we drink before Chris like shuts it down?
You know, I provided those myself.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't let the company
reimburse them from Red Bull. Right?
I wouldn't let the company reimburse me. I'm like, I want to provide these. So yeah, it's so funny.
Let's talk about Domo. Why did you decide to come back and work with Josh again?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, when you take a company from $3.5 million to $500 million, and by the time I left, it was close to $8 million, because I did a 2-year earnout at Adobe, close to $800 million. I think now it's $3 billion, by the way.
In rev.
I mean, that's how big that business is that we built. When you do that, you end up in an environment where you get to kind of almost do whatever you want, right? Now the problem is I'm not like you. Like I don't have that, you know, all my great ideas, they happen after someone else did. I'm like, that damn iPhone, I should have thought that's genius, right? Just like I'm more of an operator and an executor. Yeah. And I was talking to one of the VCs from Omniture, and I said, hey, what do I do? You know, I got a couple shekels in the bank. He goes, take your time. He goes, 50 interviews, 50, which in retrospect, and I would never tell you this, 50 interviews is a lot.
Oh yeah,
is a lot.
And by the way, this is not. Zoom is still not like
hell no.
Thing,
this is
so
it is.
You're making.
I'm trips. New York, San Francisco, Chicago, Dallas. Like I'm just nonstop.
Oh yeah.
And I did the first interview. I mean, the first one, and so I should highlight. I had part of my contract with Adobe. I had an earnout period, and I had a guaranteed leave period. Right? If you can negotiate that in a deal, you should. But what it was basically is that my job for a period of time, about 6 months, was just to not take another job, right? Because my vesting would stop. And so I thought, well, I'll do this first interview. I did this first interview, great opportunity. The founder says, hey, can you stay in here for just a minute? And he steps out. He comes back and he goes, we want to hire you right now. When can you start? I'm like 6 months. He goes, what the hell? Why the hell are you in here? What are you doing? So I went through this entire process and had all these interviews. And in the end, it came down to 2 opportunities that really made the most sense. Jared Smith had just returned from Google at Qualtrics. And Josh was coming at me aggressive. Now, Josh called me. And to be fair, when he was founded Domo, he called me at 2:30 in the morning. He's like, hey, what are you doing? I'm like, sleeping. What are you doing? Hey, let's go have dinner, which is a shitty time to have dinner, by the way. We went, the only place open was Denny's, which is also a shitty place to have dinner. So we get there about 3:30 in the morning, and he starts to tell me, he goes, look, man, I'm gonna start this new business. And he starts to walk me through it. And he goes, I think I can take all the data that's out there, all the disparate data. I can bring it all into one common language, put it through a platform, make it business user friendly. And I'm like, bad idea. And he goes, I can bootstrap this thing. I think at the time he was thinking he could do it for like $40 million. I'm like, dude, the reason no one has figured this out is because it's so freaking hard. Yeah. And so this, and then I continue through all my interviews, and Josh starts to come after me a lot more aggressive. And there's a time when you realize that, and I apologize for the analogy, the devil you know is so much better than the devil you don't know. And as I sit back at the time, I'd just gone through a divorce. My now wife and I are dating, and we started talking about it. We go, you know what? Like, it still feels like home, right? Josh is predictable. Working with him is you're never going to be bored. It's always highly energetic. And he's tackling a market that is driven by data. And in our lifetime, Tyler, data is the currency we're going to trade on. You're seeing it now with AI. I mean, they keep talking AI, but the AI doesn't work if there's no data, right? So it's a really powerful mindset. And so when I looked at that, and at the time, Qualtrics wasn't the Qualtrics it is today. Yeah. Right. And I was, I kept, Jared goes, I remember Jared and I were talking. He goes, I go, who reports to me? And it was a COO opportunity. Who reports to me? He goes, everybody. Who's my direct reports? Nobody. I'm like, holy shit, is this a riddle? Like, it's a completely flat organization. And I'm just like, this is 2011. And I'm like, I don't know how that's going to work. Like, that's not the way I think. It's not the way I operate. Yeah. And then Josh, there was one sticking point with Josh and it was, I wanted a board seat. I never wanted to, leave a board meeting. I never wanted to not be a part of a vote. And he lined up, said, yeah, you're in. And it was, I walked out of Qualtrics, went in, signed with Josh. So one, model, the data, the knowing Josh, knowing the business, knowing what he's capable of doing. At the time, pulled me back in for sure.
Josh must be the most iconic entrepreneur in Utah. I mean, there's a short list of a few, but he's one of them. I would say he's the guy because of what he did with Omniture. Sure. Right. What makes Josh so special as a CEO?
There's a couple of things. I think he has no fear, right? And to be fair, part of the reason I'm not an entrepreneur is because I'm not smart enough. Like like I said before, I like everyone else's ideas, but part of it is also look, I grew up in the the poor side of the equation, right, on welfare and stuff, and so I become a lot more fearful about choices I make. Josh has zero fear. That's one. He is able to manage, and I think you've seen this now, through your efforts. So much of a CEO's job is managing investors' expectations, managing your board expectations, and Josh manages that flawlessly, right? Look, there's some wrinkles happening within Domo right now and a new CFO, but Josh is back at the helm, and I think we're going to see things start to really turn around on that side. So that's the other side. His product vision, and I said this, earlier I was saying, about Wolfgang, how powerful it was having him come into product. Josh, when Josh has a vision on the product, like, and he's got clear line of sight on it, he will cut everybody else out. He'll collaborate to get there, but once he is, his aperture is narrowed and his focus is there, he executes on that flawlessly. He's able to hire well, which is a really big challenge, for a lot of people. He is fearless relative to recruiting. And, there's been times where, and he may not want me to confess this sin on his behalf, so I apologize, Josh, but there's times where he's brought people in that he knew they were a 2-year solution.
Yeah.
Because they were there to solve a problem that brought the business and the entity into something that wasn't.
Yeah.
And often that's not the way we think. Sometimes, even when I was a CEO, like I'm sitting there, I'm like, I look forward to retiring with you, right? And I kept thinking past the current problem to, could I see me and Tyler in this thing, doing boat drinks in 20 years?
Yeah.
That's, Josh would say, I need this right now. It's a 2-year problem. This is the best person to fix it. And I love that. And he was able to raise money like no one's business. I mean, $900 million raised it, and to be fair, the problem that Domo solved, very, very expensive, very challenging to build.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Being there and this being my first real company opportunity out of college, like I didn't realize what it meant to raise $1 billion of venture capital.
Yeah.
Nearly. I had no idea. I was just like, oh, this is probably normal.
Yeah.
And then Josh would say things like, by the way, we're the highest funded SaaS company in history. It's like, oh, and who else is up there? Like Workday, but they're like still 400 million less or whatever. It's like, what?
Crazy days.
We're like, wait, right?
Yeah.
Now companies are raising $1 billion all the time, but raising $1 billion back then that's like raising seemingly 10 billion today.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like unfathomable, right? Yeah. It's like OpenAI stuff.
Crazy.
Right.
It is, very. Yeah.
I had so much respect for Josh. I mean, still do. It's, as a young salesperson, just watching the way that he operated and navigated was special. I looked at Josh like a superhero or celebrity or something. Sure. Like I was intimidated to talk to Josh. I'm gonna bring him on the show, by the way.
Let me know if I can help.
yeah. I'll send him a couple of clips from our thing.
Yeah.
So you joined Domo. It's early.
Yeah.
Like they had raised not a lot, 5 or 10 million when you started.
Yeah. I mean, Josh had bootstrapped himself. He used his own money, I believe, to acquire Corda, which was the foundation charts, graphs component of that. Corda was doing, I think at the time, about $7-8 million. Mm-hmm. I mean, they were literally 1-2 blocks over from where we're at right now today. Just
who was the CEO of that company?
I don't know. I don't remember. Adam Landerfeld was the only one that I'm aware of that truly made the transition from Corda. So when I joined, remember, Josh had mandated NDAs to see the product. So we showed no demos unless somebody just signed an NDA.
That was wild.
Crazy, right?
Like we signed like tens of thousands of NDAs.
Well,
easily.
And it's funny because you think about it, and you're like, like you tell that story today, and unless you were there, people are going,
impossible.
You're exaggerating, but
we had one-click there was a process that was built out where like ADMs would be on the phone, and the customer would be like, "We want to see a demo," and we'd be like, "Great, we're just going to send you a one-click NDA, and once you sign that, we'll get you going." And like, it just was part of the thing, and we got so good at saying that people were like, "Oh, okay,
yeah,
sure,
yeah." So weird.
We'll sign it.
But for the first year when I was back there, we didn't have one click, so we actually had to, we're pushing red lines, and we're going like it was a crazy time. But yeah, they had not had a paying customer yet, so they were still, pulling off the $7-8 million off the quarter revenue line, and I think he had raised I think he had just raised 20 million, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, at the time.
Now, the show that we have here is called The Roller Coaster.
Yes, sir.
And the reason it's called The Roller Coaster is because no great company is built in a straight line.
Correct.
Right? We go through an insane amount of ups and downs. And when you're doing startups, those ups and downs are condensed into very short periods of time, right? Yeah. So one day you can be at the top of the mountain and also have your face in the mud. with Domo, like I think outsiders looking in, they go, man, they raised all this money and they grew and they went public and all this stuff, but it wasn't all that, right?
Yeah.
There was a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
What were some of the most difficult parts from your vantage point of, Domo not being able to become this $5 or $10 billion juggernaut like everybody sort of expected us to?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the CAC, cost of acquiring a customer, was so high. Yeah. And no matter what we did, I still believe we had one of the most vetted demand gen engines. I think the partnership with Heather Zinzak, I mean, she was
she was great.
And she was, and she was neck deep in the data. The ADM organization was, pretty spectacular. We were pretty well aware of the things we needed to do to move an opportunity forward enough to put it in front of in front of a rep. But the costs were just so high. So remember Josh, if you remember this, but Josh took some time and said, look, we're going to build freemium, right? And I mean, ask him, but I think the investment in building out that freemium was, it was a lot of money. Yeah. Pretty close to 9 figures, I would think. Yeah. And when you look at it, you're going, you know what? We're not the same thing. People don't necessarily want to use a free product to take corporate data into a system. And so that's, that kind of landed flat. And to be fair, this is going to be somewhat controversial. I also think Josh surrounded himself pre-pandemic with some executives that didn't live here and were part of it, right? So that, you go back to
a little bit of the magic.
Well, because you go back to that cultural powerhouse that was Omniture. Yeah. I mean, I honestly believe I could call any person from Omniture today and they would answer my call within 4 rings. 1,800 employees, right? But the reason that was powerful is because the nucleus of the culture was so central. Now, again, this is pre-pandemic, right? But when you've got, CFO, head of corp dev, head of engineering, I mean, these people not engineering, but not living central. And when the cultural components happen, like on a Friday night, right? And those people aren't here. They never become part of that fabric. And so, again, controversial in my opinion, but I believe that had an impact, right? There was no Zoom. There was no, these people would come in late on a Monday. They would leave on a Thursday. I believe that was a big challenge for the business, in my opinion. Last one, I'd say competition. Unlike the days of Omniture, where we're sitting going, look, we're going to do rock, paper, scissors at this event of it, for the entire industry, and whoever wins is going to get a Hummer, right? As opposed to that, Tableau was a formidable foe, and they were good. We still mess with them. You remember we did the Tableau hell thing out of when they were in Austin, but I don't think we had the competitive edge like we had at the Omniture days. I don't know. Again, dilution, people becoming a lot more aware of dilution. It's not like we raised $1 billion in one tranche, right? It was repeated bites at the apple, and there was some debt layered in there, convertibles layered in there.
So many components.
And then all of a sudden, when you sit back and you realize, as a leader, who's, you come here, one, for the opportunity, and you realize just these continual slices at the apple was a problem, right? And so I think the combination of all of that kind of came together. I don't know. It's a great question. I'm to be fair, I haven't sold a share. Like,
really?
No, and because I still don't understand. Like, it is still a way better product than Tableau. Yeah. The mindset of the engineers, I think, are still better. They're not sitting inside of Salesforce, I don't know. So we
still a believer.
We haven't sold anything, like
we, as in you and Josh,
me and Angie, like just my wife and I. We haven't sold a share, and one could scratch one's head and go, hey, maybe 65% down is a sign for you, but we still believe. I think I think things will turn around, and I'm a lot more hopeful now that Josh is back. To be honest with
sure.
you.
I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, look, I think I would have stayed at Domo quite a bit longer, but what happened with me was I had an opportunity to move over to customer success.
Yeah.
And who was running customer success at the time, interviewed with her, and had some really great meetings, and was really excited about the opportunity. It was just going to be something new and challenging. And I remember she told me, like, hey, we're not going to hire you. We're going to hire somebody else. And I said, well, help me understand why. What did I miss? What could I have done better? And there wasn't an answer. And that really messed me up. I was like, man, like, I thought there was a good opportunity, but all these things happen for a reason.
Yeah.
And then I had an opportunity with HireVue to build out their global renewals practice. I'm like 25 at this time. It's a big role. Went over and did that for a couple of years, and the rest is history. But the run at Domo was a lot of fun. When I tell people that they catered breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day, they're like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Like, no, every day.
Yeah.
We ate there. We stayed there all day, every day. Yeah. And it's like, whether that was a smart financial decision or not, who knows? But like, tell you what, we could get the best people.
Yeah.
And they were working.
Agreed.
A lot.
I agree.
So.
Well, it's like the Red Bull expenditures for me, right?
Yeah.
Or minor expenditures. It's not that I was really trying to create energy. It's like I'm sitting going, look, if these will eat this, they'll sell more and they'll service better. And it wasn't like that. I'm sitting going, this brings them back into this culture. Right? Yeah. It allows them to sit there and go, you know what? When they're sitting there and they're their in-laws' house and they're talking over the barbecue, and someone goes, yeah, they cater breakfast, free Red Bulls. That's kind of what we're thinking of. But again, whether I made full-time economic sense, one could do the math on that, I guess. So
remember, to put a bow on Domo, me and a friend of mine, Casey Johnson.
Yeah.
We bought some Red Bull hats, and we thought we were so cool because we brought them into you and we gave them to you.
Yeah.
And it cost us like, $12 or whatever to do it. I remember we were like, we just thought that was like awesome.
I loved it, man.
I want to talk about, when did you leave Domo?
Just after the first earnings call as a public company.
Oh, okay. So you weren't there long at all.
Left 2018.
And did you exercise the same discipline to go do 50 more interviews after Domo?
No, at the time, one of our board members at Domo was also a board member at a local company here called Inside Sales. And
who was that?
Mark Gorenberg.
Okay.
And one of the other board members, a young lady named Defina, and I sat next to each other at a Domo dinner event. And Defina got done. It was me, my wife, Defina. It was an event up in Salt Lake. And she got done and she calls Mark. She goes, we got to go after Chris. Like, we got to go after him pretty aggressively. At the time, the board had arrested control of the company from the CEO, the founder at the time, Dave Elkington. And, one should double click on what that means when they start to step into an organization, but they were approaching me really aggressively. And my thing was, look, if I'm going to go do something, I'm going to be CEO. I'm not going to stay in the president or CRO roles. And they put together a pretty compelling vision of what was out there. At the time, Dave had just turned down a $3.3 billion acquisition offer from Salesforce. So, I'm walking in and I'm looking at these metrics and I'm like, I got 2 years of runway. I've got appetite. My cap table is pretty thick, $309 million, which is a lot of money, but it's not $1 billion. And on my cap table, I've got Microsoft, and Salesforce, and they don't love each other. So that's also creates a really kind of compelling, opportunity. and I'm selling to salespeople. It's like, how, like, I'm like, is this a joke? Like, who wouldn't take this opportunity? So we met somewhat behind the scenes and had some interviews, and Mark finally, he came into a board meeting just after the earnings call. And he was making eye contact with Josh in a weird way. The board meeting is just getting ready to start, and Josh calls me out. He goes, "Hey, come here. Come talk to me." We walk out of the boardroom, my office is right next to it. And he goes, "What's going on?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Mark's not looking at me straight. What's going on?" Like, that's how in tune Josh was. He knew from looking at Mark that something was up. So yeah, that's when I left, 2018.
So it seems like the decision for you to join inside sales was simple.
Yeah. I mean, in retrospect, it was, my due diligence skills have been sharpened greatly.
Talk to me about this, what you were referencing with regards to, I don't know what you called it, not a hostile takeover, but it's...
Yeah, so they arrested control. So what that means is that the board had enough conflict with the founder that they, he did a voting, he assigned one of his board seats to someone that he thought was a friendly.
Oof.
That was not. And so then they had enough votes to say, "We want you, you're still CEO, but you can't be in the business. I mean, you can't come in the building, work from your pool."
Whoa.
And which showed me there was a clear path to CEO. It's like, okay, come in as COO, you'll work with Dave, the entire company will roll up through you.
Right.
Once Dave feels comfortable that you've kind of got the thing culturally in line, that we'll pull the trigger. And to be fair, I spent 3 hours with Dave, before all this. And Dave walked me through the vision, walked me through what he was building, walked me through the power of the model. And I'm just like, done, right? He has no tension with this thing, right? He
was comfortable with what was going on.
Well, because he made, you make a bad call on an independent board seat, and you end up getting pinched because now you got a friendly that's, voting the other direction. I mean, that's a critical mistake.
Yeah.
And there were consequences to it. So yeah, it was, again, my due diligence skills. When you look at a board, you look at investors, and you've got that much fatigue and, some frustrations. I mean, it was eye-opening for sure. Yeah.
So you were COO for a little bit. You stepped in as CEO of the company.
Yeah, it was probably within 3 months. I was promoted. Yeah.
And how did that go?
Yeah, again, going back to my previous, due diligence skills being a little bit underdeveloped at the time, which is interesting, right? Because you think about a sales call, right? I mean, one of the, most critical time you have in a sales call is your prep work, the discovery process, right? I mean, you've heard me talk about it so many times, right? Like if I end up choking at the end of a deal, it happened in discovery, right?
Yeah.
Like, and yet I'm sitting here and I think my happy years were there. I'm going, look, man, Josh is a very complicated person to share the light with, right? He casts a pretty massive shadow. So my happy years were highly tuned, and I'm like, this is real for me. I'm going to do this. What I found out, I had my first exec team meeting. I had it at Riverside Country Club, and I remember I asked the question, "How many employees do we have again?" And there was a range. Like, it was dramatic. And I'm like, holy shit, like, that's easy. You can count that on a clipboard. And I said, okay, let's walk me through gross retention and those ranges as well. So I ended up going, okay, I'm going to break this business down to bare metal. Because what Dave had built is he'd built a couple of different products, right? It was known for Power Dialer, which is just a, smile and dial system.
Yeah.
But that thing, to be fair, I think we were long in the tooth on that. Like, there was, the market was moving away from that direction a bit. And the product that was really powerful was a product called Playbooks, right? And it was all, he had harnessed the power of his relationship with Salesforce to take all of the collective intelligence that you have from anybody trying to sell to you across the entire platform and harness that and say, what worked? What didn't work? I mean, think of it as almost like ways for sales, right? Like, there's somebody in front of you that goes, look, I tried to hit Tyler up and he didn't respond to this. And when he does read emails, he's always reading emails on Monday at this time, right? So it was a really compelling thing. But as I broke the business down to bare metal, our gross retention was misstated by 40%. We were saying we had 95% gross retention, and it was 55.
Oh, dude,
which is well, because what they weren't doing is, and Dave had created kind of really interesting silos of the business and stuff, but they weren't taking down sales. They were only calling it trits. And so all of a sudden you're sitting there looking at this business and you're going, and then there was a whole segment of the business. They go, that's too small. We won't count that. I go, but it does count. Like I can bifurcate and go, here's my enterprise gross retention. Here's my mid-market.
Right.
There was
no aggregate.
There was nothing like that.
Yeah.
And so, the 2 years of runway that we had ended up being 14 months. And I'd just taken 2 months to figure out where the business was. And the power dollar business, I tried to sell it. I tried to do everything I could, and there was no market for it. There was no one wanted anyone competing goes, like, I'm already taking those customers. I'm taking them at 45% a month clip right now. Like, why would I buy this? So I couldn't sell that. So I had to do a pretty aggressive round of restructuring, which was heart-wrenching, right? Because, me, I'm a softie, right? I cry at red lights, And so when I go from being in an environment where I step in, and Dave, like Josh, they cast a pretty massive cultural shadow. So, the employees don't like the fact that Dave has been told to work from his home, right? So I'm stepping into that environment, and people are like, well, I'm going to quit. And I'm like, holy shit, I'm not sure, but I think if everyone quits, the board's going to go, hey, what the hell, Chris, right? So I'm sitting there and I'm begging these people, right? I'm standing up in front of them saying, look, trust me, stay in this thing with me, stay here with me. We will get through this. And this is before I realized where the business really is. So imagine, I have begged people to stay. I then find out where we're at, and I have no choice but to restructure. Just absolutely heart-wrenching at the time. So we ended up through, did a couple rounds of restructuring. The fatigue of the investors was pretty high. No one was willing to throw in more money. The board directed us to make a run at debt. I hired a debt-minded CFO. We ran a pretty decent process. He ended up getting sideways with the board because he was a straight shooter, and sometimes you got to put a little board English on the ball. He didn't do that very well, and we ended up in a process with our bankers and found a private equity partner out of Texas and sold the business. Yeah, fascinating.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Is that public? What the company transacted for?
No. It was closed transaction.
But less than $3.3 billion. What they
less
had
than $3.3 billion.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of times, now that you have the experience being in the seat as a CEO, and even at Doma, like, you had a seat at the table, but you're still not in the seat.
Sure.
You realize, like, oh, that's what it means to be a CEO.
Yeah.
Right? It's like you're the center of a wheel of all the constituents.
Yeah.
The board, your advisors, your company, your executive team, the public, your partners, your customers. It's like, it's you. Yeah. It's not your number two. It's not your number three. It's you. Yeah. And all of that down pressure is on you. And I can't, there's no way to prepare a CEO for this until you're sitting in the middle of that and going, whoa, like, this is all me. Yeah. And it's hard because from your vantage point, you have all the information. So now bare metals, know what's going on. Yeah. But the employees don't. They have a fraction of the information. And so when you start coming in and ruffling feathers, seemingly, to them, they're going, man, who is this guy? What is he doing? Yeah. And if they only knew what you knew, I think they could empathize. Okay. Sure. We get it, right? But it's like, man, being able to, I always struggle, and I didn't have hundreds of employees at our company, but we went through a few of these phases where it was like, guys, I wish you understood what I understood about business. We're doing this is like, we're like desperate. Like, this isn't like, I'm not just doing this to do that. I mean, it's like, we have to do this. I'm so sorry. Right.
Yeah. But to be fair, I think, and you saw this even when I was, president at Domo, like the level of transparency is what allows people to buy in to something past this quarter.
Absolutely.
Right. And so, and again, it was a big debate, when I realized where we were at, and I sat down with my exec team and I'm like, all right.
How much do we share, right?
Like, and I went through and I said, look, I'm telling the story. Because we see line of sight. We see a path out of this thing. We are going to have to make some really difficult choices, but I'm telling the story. And so I was pretty, I was transparent in a way that wasn't politically, controversial, because you could, last thing I want to do is go, hey, let me grab the previous king and throw him under the bus. But it was just like, let me show you where we're at. Right. And I found myself in an environment where I had to actually, first I had to lay a foundation of educate them on SaaS metrics, educate them on what a P&L is, walk them through why these things matter. Even runway didn't really register. Right. I mean, the money he raised from Microsoft, he raised in a 15-minute conversation, 15 minutes, And so the company had never really thought of that, and I was sitting there going, you know what I'm not going to do? I'm not going to raise money on a 55% gross retention. I can tell you that for sure, Yeah. So I was pretty transparent because I just, again, it had some presentation to it, but I brought them into the tent. I had to. Everybody. I had begged these people to stay in their seat with me.
Yeah.
Like, people turned down jobs to stay in their seat with me, and so now some of them were losing their jobs. Yeah. It was an eye opener. Yeah. It was really, really interesting times.
Do you, now that you've been a CEO and you've been a president of a company and a CRO, you've been all the things.
Sure.
Which of those do you prefer or gravitate to? Is that a question you can answer?
Yeah, no. To me, it's a CEO role. Yeah. And it depends on who your partner is, right? If I'm, if you're a number two and you've got somebody like Josh, that, I've got, and look, I was with him for 20 years, so my pattern recognition with Josh was really, really high. That's interesting. But even now, for me, it's probably a CEO role. I know how to manage. I know how to manage a board. I can, I know how to raise money. I know how to hire. I know how to retain. And clearly, most of the challenges of companies is, and this is short-sighted somewhat, I guess, but part of the challenge with product companies is they've got the product vision and they can't figure out the go-to-market angle. They can't figure out that product market fit. I have that all day. So the fact that I've got, I don't have the smart stuff. That's what I hire an engineering team and a product lead for, but I have what makes a business successful. That's part of my DNA. So I feel like that's it's a powerful combination. It also helps in the boardroom. So so my next role will be a CEO role.
So there's no chance you and Josh get together again?
We're together all the time.
But
we've never even, it's interesting when Josh took that brief year off, the CEO that was hired, he's my oldest friend in the world.
Oh, really?
John Miller. Like, he was, I was his best man at his wedding. That's how my wife and I met.
Were you part of making that happen with Domo, or was it just?
No. So I worked to get Josh I helped get John Mellor at Omniture, and then he did, got fat, dumb, and happy with the Adobe RSU money. He stayed at Adobe for the longest time, and then when he joined back, I'd already left Domo. So, but I was the one that introduced John to Josh back in the Omniture days. So.
Fascinating, Chris. Yeah. Is there? I mean, what are your plans? Where do you go from here? I think recently you left Entrada. You did a stint there. Mm-hmm. What did you learn by being at Entrada?
It's interesting. When I was going through my process, with the bankers at Inside Sales, it was announced that Adam Edmonds had taken over as CEO of Entrada. And I'd had the privilege of knowing Adam for a dozen years. I was a member of his board of directors at Allegiance back a dozen years ago. Yeah. And so I call him, I go, bro, did you do your due diligence? Because I didn't, because I didn't know anything about Entrada. I mean, what's funny is like the gentleman Nobu who invested in Omniture, he was the only investor of any magnitude at Entrada, right? Just so funny. And Josh had introduced them, right?
Is this a high net worth or is this a fund?
No, it's a gentleman.
Nobu's a guy.
Nobu's a guy. He lives part-time right here in Provo and part-time in Japan. He's amazing. Like, yeah, and I can do an introduction at some point as well. But all I knew about Entrada at the time was they process rent. That was it. That was literally the only thing I knew about the business. I assumed as I was driving down I-15 and I'd see their building, I'm like, they must be on like one floor. They just paid for the crown rights. I had no concept of this. And so when
how big of a business was?
Yeah, so I call Adam. I say, bro, did you do your due diligence? He goes, I did. He goes, we should talk. And so we go sit down and we have a 3-hour dinner and he walks me through the business and I'm like, holy smokes, this thing was, at the time was $200 million, and, in terms of revenue. Wow. And he had, while it wasn't announced yet, he had term sheets for $507 million as a round, right? Which is a massive round. Yeah. Single largest round. I think it became 507 to make it the single largest round ever in the state of Utah. That's what, that was deliberate action to move it up to that. So, again, it was a business that was highly data driven, and that was appealing. He had already started to hire his team, and Jason Taylor, who's the CTO. I'd known Jason Taylor from back in the day as well. Had the pleasure of working with him, and I just thought this makes a ton of sense. Coming in on that 507 was also a lot of the locals like Josh, like Todd, like Ryan. And I thought it just makes a ton of sense. Mm-hmm. And then I had the privilege of working with Silver Lake at a previous board engagement that I had. And I started to watch their operations team, and I'm like, they're legit. Because most private equity operating teams, they're actually not operators, they're babysitters, right? They don't. And Silver Lake was the exception. So I thought, I could learn a ton here. So it was a great 16, 17 months. So. Yeah.
And you left the company recently, a couple of months ago. Why'd you do that?
My wife and I, we found out that our toddler has, autism. And so we needed to take some time and figure out exactly what we need to do for him. And I couldn't give the opportunity, the energy and time that I believe it deserves. It will be the largest SaaS company in the state of Utah. I have no doubt. It's a massive, massive business. And so, but I couldn't give it what I needed. That was a big deal for me. And so as Angie and I started to talk about it, and we're in the blowback from understanding what autism is, and we're still learning, to be honest with you. We realized we need to take some time back and say, let's step back, figure out what's going on, and then, get started. So
tell me about how that was as a father to find out that your son had autism.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've got a little father of the bride kind of dynamics with my family, right? My oldest is 30. So my oldest daughter's 30. My next child's 27. He's my son, 22-year-old son. And then I've got 2 step boys that are 18 and 15. And then we had a baby when, 10 days before I turned 50, which is biblical. That's like Abraham kind of stuff right there, right? 10 days after he was born, on my 50th birthday, my first grandson was born. Right.
Oh, amazing.
So I literally have my birthday twin is also my grandson, and we're 50 years difference in age. And what was interesting about it is I started to watch them develop together. And my son's name is Hart. My grandson's name is Gatsby. Hart was walking by 9 months, running by a year, just athletic, Gatsby was slower on that side. Gatsby was talking, he was engaging, he was pretending, he was doing eye contact. So we knew something was happening, something was different. And, you know, the pediatrician kept saying, just roll it off. You're not a big deal. It's okay. You know, and then finally we're in there. We're probably about a year and a half appointment. And the pediatrician goes, let's just get him tested. Well, that's COVID, right? So how do you test a kid on, you know, for autism? What they did is they had us, you know, chase him around the house with an iPad while, you know, this team is back in their office, their homes, I guess, looking on video as they kind of interact with him. Like, ask him to do this. I'm like, he didn't respond to any of this shit, guys. Like, he doesn't, you know. And they go, yeah, we think he's got something, but we need to do a real test. And then he started talking a little bit. So we're like, all right, maybe it was just a slow developer or whatever. Yeah. He still wouldn't like look at you. You know, you won't, like if you point at something, he has no concept of what you're doing. He won't look. So if you want to, like he and I were in the car the other day and we were just leaving Scottsdale and we're driving and there was a bunch of hot air balloons. I go, hot air balloons. And he's like, I'm like pointing, he won't listen. I have to hit the window. So like pull his attention over there, you know? Yeah. So we ended up, we started talking, we go, no, he's probably okay. Let's just, we're good. And then we started to see more signs. We ended up going back in, doing a physical, like truly in person. And this was Tuesday before Thanksgiving of last year. They diagnosed him with autism. It's a mild form of autism. As you know, autism used to be a bunch of different names and now it's just a spectrum. He's on the lighter side of it. But it's a lot of work. I mean, this, you know, his training, the programs themselves are incredible. The backlog to get into them is immense. Like we started working immediately as of November, just this previous year, and he still will not get into his training program until the end of April. And it's 34 hours a week for 2 years. Oh, wow. To help him, to help train him on how to adjust to a world that was built differently than he is. And so it's you know, it's been a lot of soul searching. And to be fair, Tyler, I'm so blessed because there are a lot of children that are on the spectrum that have very different issues than Hart does, right? Hart doesn't necessarily communicate well, but he is fun. He's passionate. He's a toucher. And I was talking to a father the other day, and he has a son on the spectrum. He goes, the best time of his day is at night when his kid's asleep because he can finally hold him, right? Like, because he won't let you touch him. Wow. You know. So we're while the diagnosis itself is heartbreaking in a lot of ways. I'm really blessed that he is where he's at, and that we're here, and they've got programs for them, and they've got trainers and educators to help educate us and train him and teach him, and so. But it's been eye-opening, man. So much to learn.
I think that God. You believe in God? Huh? God believe whether you are or not, I was going to say the same thing. Just FYI.
Roll with it.
I believe that God places children with special needs, regardless of where they fall on the spectrum, to fathers and families that can handle it, right? And that will be loving and caring and supportive. And I've always felt that way. So I feel like, good for you that you were chosen to have him. You're really lucky.
Thank you. Yeah. So, and to be fair, we are very fortunate. Like he is the energy of the house. Right.
He's looking kid I've ever seen.
He's really pretty boy, and it's funny because he does, he helps bring the older boys back in. He's incredible, and to be having the father the bride thing with having a toddler 3 years old and a 30-year-old. I wouldn't necessarily do that a lot, but it is. I also know what I was going to miss. Yeah. Right. Because, and your oldest is 7, 5, and 2, and you have another one coming. There's a point at which you're going to look back and go, oh man, like my oldest is Jess. I'm like, I would love to go snuggle with Jess, but it's weird. She's 30, right? I can't do that, So it's just knowing that now as an older father, it allows me to really embrace the stuff that I know I'm going to miss, the stuff that I didn't do before because I was chasing, you know, I was chasing a coin. And at the time, because I grew up, you know, poor, it seemed to be the only responsibility I had was to provide for my family, to make sure they never had to worry about where do I eat, where do we live, like stuff like so. But now I'm more aware. I can step back and I get to do the things with heart that I know I'm going to miss down the road. So he's my little shadow.
I spent a lot of time. I'm a huge advocate of balance, which is a word that's so misunderstood in my mind. Yeah. It's frowned upon in Silicon Valleyville that we operate in. Yeah. Truly. And I'm guilty of a lot of the things you mentioned. I coach CEOs and founders on this now there are frameworks and mechanisms where you can achieve balance. Yeah. And actually, once you do that, you'll have a competitive advantage on those that don't have it. What advice would you share with your younger self or with an entrepreneur that's thinking about starting a company or in the shit right now about how to unlock that and make sure they don't miss all of this golden time with their kids and their family?
Yeah, you know, and I've had the honor of talking to a few of these younger, you know, executives as I mentor people. And the thing I say consistently is, look, I know it sounds like a meme because you see it on Instagram and you hear people talking about it, you know. In the end, what really matters you know, when you're sitting there and you're facing, you know, the next evolution in your journey of life, what you're going to want around you are people that love you, people that care about you. And so my advice is, and my advice to myself as a younger person is the same thing. Like there are sacrifices that are too big, right? And those are always in the house. In my opinion, those sacrifices are always at home. The business will always be there. You hire right, you pay attention, right? Yes, there are going to be days where you got to buck up and you got to put in 18 hours, or there may be days where you got to put in, you know, a 72-hour stretch. Like they will happen, but they should not happen at the sacrifice of your relationship with your spouse, which is the most important thing, or the relationship with your children. You cannot operate effectively if you're sitting in a meeting worrying about your family, right? Or, God forbid, dealing with a family falling apart because you weren't there, right? You cannot, and you're coaching this, you cannot be that effective at your role as an executive or an entrepreneur, whatever it is, if your home is falling apart. You can't.
100%.
So
let's end on that. Thanks for coming in. Seriously, it's a dream to have you on and be able to talk.
Such an honor, man. I love what you're doing. You know, this is one of the great things about being an executive for so long is that, you know, in strange little ways, I actually give myself credit for people that I've had the opportunity to work with. I take a little bit of like strange pride in what you're doing and what you've built. And I'm really glad you reached out. Thanks, you, man.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you for joining another episode of the Roller Coaster Podcast. Really happy that we had Chris Harrington on today. It was a dream for me to host him.
When you take a company from $3.5 million to $500 million, and by the time I left, it was close to $8 million, because I did a 2-year earnout at Adobe. Close to $800 million. I think now it's $3 billion, by the way. In Rev. I mean, that's how big that business is that we built. When you do that, you end up in an environment where you get to kind of almost do whatever you want.
Chris Harrington, it's great to see you.
It's good to see you, man.
It's great to be with you and really excited to dig in here. I want to ask you about your favorite chapter of your career. You've done a lot.
Yeah.
You're somebody who I respect a lot, and I think the audience will understand why as we go through this.
Thank you.
Tell me about your favorite chapter of your entire career.
Favorite chapter? I think it would be the Omniture days, honestly, just before I knew you. I joined Omniture in 2002. Either